Hi, my name is Jeremy Lee. Welcome to my channel. I made this video lecture for my student in school, or if you're just interested about history, then this channel also might be for you. Today, we are going to talk about the first intermediate period. Before we talk about the first intermediate period in Egypt, we need to know about the Old Kingdom. I made a video about the Old Kingdom period. So to summarize, the Old Kingdom period was the golden age for the Egyptians. So it was during the Old Kingdom period that Egypt has its golden age. Golden age, which is a time, golden age, which is a period of time a kingdom or a city or a nation reached its highest prosperity, peace, and security. What am I trying to say? For the Egyptians who lived during the Old Kingdom period, life is good, life is awesome. Toward the ending of the Old Kingdom period, things start to be different, and also things start to decline. As we found out that the Pharaoh no longer built mighty giant pyramids like Khufu pyramid, Menkaure pyramid, and also the Khafre pyramid. If you do notice, this pyramids is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Exactly. The largest of all is, of course, Khufu's pyramid, followed by Menkaure's pyramid, which is the second largest, and then the last one, and then followed by Khufu's pyramid, and followed by Khafre's pyramid, which is the third largest. And after that, the pyramid is getting smaller, 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 and smaller. That means one thing. The pharaoh after Khufu, Menkaure, and also Khafre, they were not as powerful and they were not as influential as their previous pharaohs before them. So that means one thing. What's going on in Egypt? Why the pharaohs getting weaker and weaker and weaker? So judging by the trend of the pharaoh building smaller and smaller pyramid, it is a sign something went wrong in the Old Kingdom period. Something's bad happens. We are going to come up with several points what makes the Old Kingdom period come to an end and then entering the first intermediate period. Now, one thing about the Egyptian, they hate changes. For the Egyptians, they are very conservative. They do not like any changes, and then they like everything as it is. Perhaps because they got inspired by the natures around them, by the world that they live. The Nile River flows constantly from the south to the north. The sun will rise in the east and then will set in the west. And then the Nile River itself, it's predictable. 2 times a year, it will be flooded. The sun, stars, and moon are in its place. And then the desert, yeah, probably the sand dunes, they will be kind of shifted. Oh, by the way, that is the reason why Egyptians, they do not like the desert. They associate desert as a place for death and chaos. Egyptians, they highly prize the idea of orderliness. The word orderliness, it was being symbolized by the Egyptian goddess, a goddess by the name of Ma'at. Ma'at will be being depicted as a female goddess who has a wing and who has a plume on her head. This is the pictures of Ma'at as the symbol of orderliness. Everything has its place, everything has its times, and Egyptians love orderliness. So the ancient Egyptians believed that if it doesn't break, then don't fix it. It's an expression to describe how Egypt loved things as it is. They do not like any change. So in Egypt, usually the pharaoh, they will rule for the rest of their life. They will become the pharaoh for the entire of his lifetime. Now, they will not going to have a new pharaoh until that the previous pharaoh died. There was this kind of interesting pharaoh during the Old Kingdom period, someone by the name of Pepi II.
Pepi II?
Yes, King Pepi II, or Pharaoh Pepi II, not king, okay. Pharaoh Pepi II, he was the longest pharaoh ever ruled Egypt. There are no other kings in the world that ruled a kingdom as long as his. He ruled Egypt for 94 years. Yes, imagine 94 years. Now, if you watched my previous video about the Old Kingdom periods, now every 30 years, the pharaoh must went through this kind of Hepset festival, which is basically is a physical test kind of festival. Yeah, basically it's a physical test for the pharaoh. The pharaoh must be able to run. The pharaoh must be able to kind of shooting arrow and wrestling with the younger men. So if the pharaoh pass all of this physical tests, then he will be allowed to reign as a pharaoh. For Pepi II, he became the pharaoh for 94 years. That means he took 3 times Headset festival. And then somehow we can assume that he passed. So you can imagine this 94 years old grandpa, he's a physically fit and muscular grandpa. Yes. Because he survived this 3 Headset festival. Another interesting trivia about Pepi II. There was a time that his palace was being infested with a lot of flies. And then there's no way for him, there's no way for everyone, there's no way for his servants to get rid of all of these flies. Now one day he had an idea. He ordered one of his servants, he ordered one of his slaves to take a dip into a honey. And then after that he asked this poor servant or this poor slave to stand up in the corner of his palace. So therefore all the flies are attracted to him, and then problem solved. So because Pharaoh Pepi II lived so long, he lived long enough until his son died. So Pharaoh Pepi II, he ruled for about 94 years old, and then he outlived his own children. He outlived all of his sons. So when he died, there's a trouble. The trouble is, Egyptians, they had no idea who is going to replace him, because all of his children died. All of his sons died. The next candidate for the next pharaoh is not one of his sons. So it's a big question mark. And then the quarrel starts, because now different faction, different family, different people, they start to quarreling who is going to become the pharaoh. I should become the pharaoh. No, it should be I become the pharaoh. It should be me become the pharaoh. No, it should be me become the pharaoh. No, it shouldn't be you become the pharaoh. No, it shouldn't be you become the pharaoh. And they quarrel. And because of this quarrel, Egypt fell into what we call a civil war. It's a war that happens between brothers against brothers, family members against family members, neighbor against neighbor. It was a total chaos as the country torn into two, back into those times before the unifications of Upper and Lower Egypt. Yes, at this moment, Egypt split in half between the Upper Kingdom and the Lower Kingdom. The Upper Kingdom has its white crown, the Lower Kingdom has its red crown. And both of this kingdom, they claim they have the candidates, and then each of them, they proclaim that they should become like the rightful pharaoh. With the death of King Pepi II, Egypt enters like what we call the first intermediate period. So it was a chaos time. Of course, war bring chaos. War bring disorderliness. It was a terrible moment for the Egyptians to live. If you somehow manage to invent like a time machine in the future, and then you wish to travel back in time visiting like the ancient Egypt, make sure you stay away from the first intermediate period, because it was a terrible time to live. It was a terrible time to be in Egypt at that time. Let me tell you why. Now, because of the civil war, different dynasty, different family, they're claiming that they should become like the rightful pharaoh. The ancient Egyptian historian described this time as the day that they have as the days that they had 70 kings in 70 days. 70 kings in 70 days. Imagine, that means they have new, different king every single day. To put it into the context, we are now living in Indonesia. Now imagine if we have like if we have like a new president every single day. What will happen to our country? What will happen to our city? What will happen to the place that we're living? Because as everybody busy with the war, nobody taking care of the farm. Egypt fell into chaos. It's the opposite of the orderliness. What happens next is nobody taking care of the farm. Many of the farms were neglected or being abandoned. The irrigation system that, using the Nile River to flood the farm is no longer working. The crops are failing. The crops were failed, and then they do not have any harvest. Because they do not have any harvest, therefore they do not have enough food for everyone. It leads to mass starvation. A lot of people, they died because of not having enough food. Neighbor, they're willing to kill another fellow neighbor just to get the precious remaining food that their neighbor has. Okay, they start to fighting for food. They start to fighting for food, not food fight, but then again, fighting for food, because food is very scarce during this time. And they're willing to kill each other. That's how terrible it is. And not just that one, during the first intermediate period, it was being described that it was a terrible moment because all of the pharaoh's tombs, that the mighty giant pyramid that was being built for the pharaoh to go to the afterlife together with their treasures, all gone, all gone. The people, the tomb raiders, they robbed the tomb, they stole the treasures, and then this is the worst thing that any ancient Egyptian can do to another fellow Egyptian. These robbers, they burned the mummy. Why is a big deal? By burning the mummy, the ancient Egyptian believed that the person can no longer be able to be resurrected someday in the future. So, and according to the ancient Egyptians' belief, so their soul will end up like, stuck here on earth and cannot go to the afterlife. And things get worse. As many people, they become poor, and also the farmers could no longer produce harvest, could no longer produce food. Now they are poor, they have nothing, but then again, their ruler still imposed them to pay the taxes, and then the tax is really, 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 really high. It was a terrible moment for the Egyptian during the first intermediate period. Now, not much kind of like, historical record about the first intermediate period, because most of the records, most of the Egyptian record, most of the Egyptian history record were damaged or lost. As Egyptians, they have this habits of like, writing their records in what we call like the papyrus paper. We will talk more about the papyrus paper in a future video. Papyrus paper is a paper made out of a plant. If you don't store this paper or scroll in a proper place, in a dry, cool place, it will be damaged. And many of the ancient Egyptian writings about their history are lost. But not all. Some of the historical writings are survived, and then we can still read it. Now, there's this kind of like, interesting story about the first intermediate period. It's a fiction story. The title is The Quarrel Between a Man and His Ba. Ba? Yes. Ba is the ancient Egyptian word for soul. Now, what does it mean? Okay, the ancient Egyptian believed that humans have three parts, okay? Their body, their physical body, their soul, which is their Ba, and also the copy of themselves. I know that is kind of a bit weird, but then again, the soul is known as the Ba, okay? Ancient Egyptians believe about resurrection. They believe that one day their body will be resurrected. So it was being symbolized. Now, whenever you see this kind of like symbol, I will put it here, somewhere here, okay? That is the symbol of life or resurrection. It's an ankh symbol. Now, without all of these three parts, Egyptians believe that someone cannot be resurrected. Now, the title, as I said earlier, is the argument or the quarrel between a man and his soul or Ba. It because somehow the story goes like this. It was a fiction story, by the way. So it was an argument. According in the story, there was this man who lived during the first intermediate period, and then he was so depressed because that life is so difficult during the first intermediate period. The war, the famines, and then the chaos that's going on, and then like, he witnessed his neighbors killing each others, and then the tax that being imposed to him by the rulers are very high. He barely could survive every day. He's starving all the time, to the point that somehow he decided to end his own life. But of course, this is the fiction story. Now, when he decided to commit suicide, all of a sudden his soul spoke to him, which is the Ba. Okay, Ba is being kind of like Ba is being depicted in ancient Egyptian as being depicted as with this one, the bird and the bird with the human head. So the argument goes like that. The Ba or the soul give a warning to that man. I will not going to return to you if you commit suicide. No matter how difficult it is, you cannot commit suicide, the Ba said. But then again, of course, the argument goes along. The men argue with the Ba. But then again, the life is so hard. My life is so miserable. I cannot take it any longer. I'm going to end my life right here, right now. And then the Ba said, well, if you do so, I will not. Okay, you will not going to resurrect it. Now, somehow, the story never finished because somehow, as I said earlier, Egyptians, they wrote their writings, they wrote their history in the papyrus paper. And what happened with this papyrus paper, like they have a tendency to kind of like, brittle and damage. So the story is just like lost. This fictional story about the argument or the quarrel between a man and his Ba, it gives an idea that the ancient Egyptian culture, they are against suicide. They against self-inflicting pain. Yes, the first intermediate period, it lasted for about like 150 years. It was lasted from 2181 until 2040 BC. So it's about like roughly about like 150 years. But Egyptian is the only civilizations in the world that they had gone through this kind of like difficult situation like the first intermediate period, yet they survive. They will rise again and they become prosper and even bigger and even better. Not many civilizations in the world like Egyptians. We will talk about the Middle Kingdom period in Egypt in the future. It's a period after the first intermediate period. And next time, we will hear more about how they managed to survive this crisis. So there you go. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. God bless you guys all. Bye-bye.